Welcome to the Great Birth Rebellion podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Melanie Jackson. I'm a clinical and research midwife with my PhD, and each episode I cast a critical eye over current maternity care practice by grappling with research and historical knowledge to help you get the best out of your pregnancy, birth, and postpartum journey. Welcome everybody to the Great Birth Rebellion podcast. Today I have a very special guest here with me, Jamie Smith, an endorsed midwife and private midwife from Tasmania. Jamie is one of the midwives who has access to the birth house or the birth centre in Tasmania. And Jamie's presented this similar, what we're going to talk about today, at multiple conferences regarding the birth stats for the birth house. But Jamie tells me that the one thing that everybody asks her when she does this presentation is how can they set up a birth house similar to the one that Jamie works at. So we're going to cover that because that's what you were all going to be thinking at the end. It's amazing. How can I do it? And so Jamie, as I said, is a private endorsed midwife. She was also one of the very first midwives who ever allowed me to mentor her into private practice. She was already a private midwife when she joined my mentorship program. But Jamie has thrived in private practice so much so that I have now invited her to be a mentor to other midwives in my mentorship program. Jamie is also a mum to 4 grown children. Welcome, Jamie.
Thanks, Mel. It's lovely to be here.
Awesome. So we're going to kick off with the very first question that I'm sure people will have is what is the birth house? And then how can they make one themselves?
Yeah, amazing. Well, it's called the Launceston Birth Centre officially, but every time I say birth centre, just think birth house because it's like an Airbnb for birthing. It's not an official medical centre or midwifery centre. It's a home away from home for birthing. And it's the oldest independent birth house in all of Australia. We've been going for 41 years now. It came about right back in the early 80s when I was a baby. So obviously I'm just letting you know what I've been told. I wasn't part of it back then. I've been a part of it for about 5 years. And what happened was a group of local women got together and started lobbying in 1981, I believe, for a house or some sort of birth centre where women could birth outside of the hospital. They had noticed that there was a significant increase in home births in northern Tassie at the time, and that had come to the attention of midwives and the local medical board, and I guess they were concerned that some of these home births were free births and that there wasn't someone like a midwife or a doctor supporting these women. And so it started this big kind of campaign of lobbying and just really grassroots level. Women wanted better choices. They wanted to be able to choose their own midwife. They wanted to be able to choose their own place of birth. And I believe they spoke on radios and were in newspapers, and it was quite a movement. It took about 2 years of lobbying to establish the birth house. So it opened in 1983 officially, and there was 1 baby born that year. There were 4 babies born the next year, 18 babies born the next year, and then 30 the year after that. And that would probably have been the average.
A few significant things I want to highlight for people just from that story is that change takes time, that it's usually grassroots, it's usually volunteers, often it's consumers to bring about change. And then it takes years again after that to see the fruit of all of that hard work. So if anybody's listening to this and thinking, how do I help with this kind of change? Just have a look at that timeline where they lobbied for 2 years and then had 1 birth in the first year. Like, but people held on and persisted in this, and this is the timeline of change.
Yeah, so a lot of it was volunteers. There was no government funding for the setup at all. It was set up as a not-for-profit and volunteers managed that. And then as time went on, they got creative in how they funded it. So women would pay fees for the service, but it was never enough for the maintenance and the equipment and everything that was needed. So some of the ways that they got funding or the resources they needed to run the birth house, they put out a newsletter which people would pay an annual subscription to. They had like monthly open houses where people could come and see the birth house. Midwives would barter their services sometimes. We've got records of exchanging midwifery care for curtains, a preserving kit, a homemade coffee table. So, yeah, like I said, really grassroots and very lots of volunteers, and they had a fundraiser each year. And I think people could also sign up to be like a supporter of the birth house or the birth centre and paid an annual subscription as well. So all those things went towards helping fund it. Then in the 80s, the government announced in 1989 that they were going to fund an alternative birthing service program. It took a couple of years for the birth centre committee to actually get funding or for it to be enacted, I guess. But when it did come in a couple of years later, there were 198 women birthed through the birth house that year in 1992. So it was a pilot program to have government-supported home birth. And women wanted it, clearly. They came in droves for the next couple of years. It was really interesting to see the stats, like most years before that, 30 or 40 births a year, and then suddenly hundreds a year for a few years when it was funded. So it was around that time that the funding started, that the midwives started collating statistics and keeping records from 1989. So although the birth house has been running for 41 years, we have statistics just from 1989 onwards, so for about 34, 35 years. And they also started asking the women for feedback, like to fill in feedback forms at the time. And obviously, unsurprisingly, excellent feedback. Women really were loving this service and wanted it. But then the funding stopped after 2 or 3 years, and then suddenly a sharp decline in women birthing through the birth house again because it just became less affordable for all the women that wanted to do it.
Can you tell us about the building itself?
Yeah.
Because initially, not a lot of money. So it's not like somebody bought a house and then started using it.
No.
They come to be able to use that space, which is opposite the hospital.
Yeah, it's just a house on the hill across the hospital. When they started, they actually opened the birth centre in the matron's flat, like the old nursing accommodation. And back then, the Launceston General Hospital had a separate site for the maternity service. So that was in a different location to the General Hospital, and there was accommodation there. And so that's where they started. And it was interesting because back then midwives could work at the birth centre as long as a doctor was willing to put up their hand and say, I'll back you up, essentially. So I noted when I was doing the research that doctors would come in sometimes and suture women or assist with births if they needed obstetric care. And then over time they moved locations a couple more times, and because of this long-standing collaborative sort of relationship with the local hospital and doctors, somehow we ended up just keeping on being able to use hospital buildings even though it's a completely private birth house and run independently. So the house we're using at the moment is also still, if you like, doctors or nurses accommodation that belongs to the Department of Health. And we've had a long-standing lease, for 41 years that we're able to use that building, which is an incredible resource. And that's what makes this so unique. Not everyone is going to have access to something like that.
Well, that's right, because it would require, so that takes out a massive investment cost. So if somebody was to do this model or try and replicate this model, I'm imagining that the easiest way logistically would be to buy a house and then lease out the rooms for use. You guys have managed to kind of, one day I called it sort of, you've managed to get squatters' rights to these like venues in order to continue this type of work.
Yeah, so the agreement is that the birth house now is run by a committee of volunteers and they manage the house, and some of them are retired midwives that worked for many, many years at the birth centre. And so their responsibility is to maintain and run the inside of the house and pay all the bills, so insurance, power, laundry, cleaning, those sorts of things. But the Department of Health has to maintain the outside of the building. So there's still a collaborative relationship there, and there's a lease agreement in place for our ongoing use of that, which is amazing.
So it's important. So in order to fund that part that the committee manages,
Yeah.
the midwives who use the house pay a fee.
Yes, correct. That's right. So I incorporate it when I'm letting women know my fees. I package them, and so what I pay the committee to use the house is already part of what the women pay me, and then I pay that on. And like I said, it's a not-for-profit. What I'm paying isn't still enough to keep the house running, and so we still have a fundraiser every single year. We go somewhere and have a beautiful dinner, and anyone in the community who's been part of the birth house or wants to be part of it can come to the dinner, and we have a silent auction of donated items, and that helps keep the building running. So we needed a new lounge, like a new couch, which is where I do all my antenatal appointments. The other one was falling apart, and we got a beautiful couch out of the fundraising from last year. I think the year before it was a new air conditioning unit that we needed for one of the bedrooms. So yeah, it's still very much a community supported place for birthing.
Are there any other midwives using the birth house at the moment?
No, so it's just been me for the last 3 or more years. Other private midwives can, they just need to contact the committee and have an agreement in place. Occasionally there's an endorsed midwife on the northwest coast of Tassie, which is 1 to 2 hours away. Sometimes she has clients that are closer here or want to birth nearer the hospital here, and they will come and use the birth centre. And occasionally midwives from Hobart, the private midwives down there, which is 2 hours south, will come and use it. But mostly it's just me. Yeah. So after the 90s, when the funding stopped, really numbers have been up and down over the years. It depends. Sometimes we've had 8 midwives working through the birth house at a time, sometimes just 1, sometimes none. So when all the government changes came in to do with private midwifery, I think around 2010, it became much more difficult to find midwives who were able to work in the birth house. And in 2017 and 18, the last endorsed midwife that they had working here left, and the committee advertised far and wide all around Australia, New Zealand, just really struggling to find an endorsed midwife so that we could keep the house open and running. And they couldn't. No one materialised. I wasn't endorsed at the time. And so they had to make the very sad announcement that they were closing it down. And ironically, that created a social media frenzy. And we got a $50,000 government funding grant to do some renovations on the house at that time. And an endorsed midwife who had been working in Melbourne, Emma Ryder, came and said that she would keep it running until a local midwife could be ready to start. So that was where I came in.
Jamie was the local midwife.
I was.
Yeah. Oh, amazing. So again, this is a pivotal moment for the birth house because it was hanging on by a thread.
Yeah.
Social media got activated, community got activated. Again, grassroots activation to keep it going. And then a few heroes, a lot in the background, but, just took one additional midwife to take it up, to keep it going. And then the baton got passed to you eventually.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that hopefully if anyone's listening to this podcast, the birth house is an absolute 100% option. And Jamie can guarantee you enough work to keep you in a full-time job as an endorsed midwife in Tasmania at the birth house. This could be your sign from the universe of what to do next.
It was a really great place to start private practice, I have to say. Like being close to a backup hospital that is really supportive. Like the history that the birth house has with the Launceston General Hospital has had its ups and downs, but we have a great working relationship now. And so it's a really lovely way to start private practice. The GPs, many GPs refer to me. Private obstetricians here have done shared care with me in the hospital. Paediatricians, obstetricians have always made themselves available to me when I want to collaborate. So I worked with Emma for about 18 months. I wasn't endorsed, like I said at the time, but I treated that like an apprenticeship. I went to every single appointment, all her births, the whole length. So that's not how normal second midwives usually operate, but I just absorbed everything I could. It was a really intense, crazy, but amazing time. And then Emma left, I got my endorsement, and I started. So yeah, that's kind of what brought me to where I am today. And I guess it was during that time, I I don't know if you've ever been to historical sites, and you just have this sense of, wow, like I wish these walls could talk to me. What would they tell me if they could tell the stories of what they've witnessed and seen? And I really had this sense of, this is sacred ground. There's a lot of new life that's happened and been brought forth in this building. And I wished I could ask the walls to tell me their stories and what they'd seen. And that was kind of what led me into the whole statistics, because one of the retired midwives on the committee had said to me in passing that there were all those stat forms in the filing cabinets and they were hoping one day someone would collate them. And that just grew for me. I noted that they used to use pages, the midwives, when they were on call before mobile phones came in.
Pages, of course.
Yeah, that was kind of cool. And then there's notes about when, like in 1999, the first 24-hour petrol station opened and the impact that had on midwives. And that's the same year that mobile phones came in. So it's just been fascinating to dig into the background of midwives in private practice. Yeah.
Yes. And so at this point in time, I think people are yelling at the podcast saying, how could we do this? Because there's a lot of midwives, I do think they're held up by the idea of going into private practice because home birth seems like a big leap from working in a hospital to going into homes. This is a bit of an intermediate entry into that kind of work life because it's opposite the hospital. As you said, there's a supportive medical system behind you where it's kind of a little bit the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
And some women don't want to birth at their homes either. They find it more comforting to go somewhere to a venue, and the added kind of bonus for them of it being opposite a hospital with a private midwife. So it can be really attractive. And a lot of midwives have said to me, oh, I'd love to open a birth house.
Yes.
And I've walked alongside people who wanted to open a birth centre and just discovered all of the massive roadblocks that come up for people when you try and open a birth centre, because there's rules like about what type of medical equipment you need on site. I think one of the rules is that you have to have a 24-hour medical cover at all times. So for the small fry community members and us midwives who are not necessarily business people, it's really challenging to open up a birth centre as a legitimate facility that ticks all the boxes. But there's a bit of a workaround in this birth centre model. So you've already highlighted the idea that there's a committee that oversees things.
Yep.
They're volunteer.
Yep.
You've got the venue, and then you've got the midwives who would come and pay a fee to use the house.
Correct, yes.
And so, I mean, short of if you've got the funds or the capability to get a house and then renovate it in such a way that would suit the birthing needs of women in a few spaces around that house, is it as simple as that? I'm saying simple.
Yeah, look, it feels that way to me. Like that's where I always get stumped when people ask me how to start a birth centre, because I don't know. I'm using a birth house and it looks like a house. There's no piped oxygen. All the little kids that come to appointments with their mamas call it Jamie's house because it feels like a home, like it's set up like a home. And so we have 3 bedrooms. 2 of them are set up for women. One of them's a little room for midwives to rest in if need be. So it's just essentially 3 bedroom, 2 bathroom, a shared kitchen living area. So that's where I do all my antenatal appointments. So the women who want to birth at the birth house come to me for all their appointments in pregnancy, and that helps them feel really at home by the time they are having their home birth in the birth house. It's not a foreign environment. They're very comfortable there. They feel really connected and safe there. And you mentioned before some women don't want to birth at home or have various reasons, and it services a large area. Like I have people coming from 2 hours away and there's no backup hospital anywhere near where they. And for me in private practice as a sole practitioner at the moment in this area, I actually can't take women that far away because I can't be in 2 places at once. If they both go into labour at the same time, I don't have anyone to back me up if I'm with someone and another woman needs me. But they can all come to the birth house and I can manage it there with my second midwife. So there's lots of benefits to that. And it really is just a home. It's not a big home or a big house. potentially if you had a couple of midwives practicing there and you had to pay rent or pay off a house, I think that could very easily be built into the fees. Most private midwives, like a full-time load would be 4 women a month. And if you had 2 midwives with that sort of amount, I think the fees that you pay would very easily cover rent or house repayments. So it does seem very doable, like keeping it simple.
People do things like buy investment properties and all kinds of things. I don't see this as too dissimilar in a sense that you're renting out your space to somebody for use, and almost identical to, like, I've had clients who lived too far away to have me as their midwife. They've made decisions to hire an Airbnb.
Totally, that's right.
It's the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
you're going to a hotel room for all intents and purposes. So the midwife still brings all of her gear as you would a home birth.
That's right.
It's just in a different room.
Yeah, and probably like half our women have birthed through the birth house when I was looking at the stats, and about half have birthed in their own home. So they're all home births, but people pick and choose depending on what suits them best. And so, all our equipment is still very portable for that reason.
And their birth is still recorded as a home birth.
Yeah, it's a home birth. Yep, that's exactly right.
Yeah, so they did have a home birth even though it wasn't in their home.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Beautiful. There are so many people's brains who are pinging right now.
Good.
And every time they drive past a for sale sign on a house, they're wondering, could I use that as a birth house?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you guys use inflatable pools, or are they?
I do. Actually, they must have done this before I started working there, but the 2 bathrooms have very large baths, very large, deep baths. So the women used to birth in the baths. But when I started, I like the pools because they're softer for women to kneel on, and I put fairy lights in them and make them all pretty and cozy them up in the bedroom. So, but that's still an option. They've got ginormous baths if they want to use the inbuilt ones.
Gorgeous. So a really community and midwifery-led initiative with the support of medical care when needed. And so they kept these beautiful stats of all of the women who gave birth through the birth house. Do we know how many women have given birth through the birth house? Yeah,
so the stats I have is about 1,300-ish. So, we're not talking huge numbers, but it's the longevity of it and the history of it over time, and that sort of time period has been really valuable. So, it averages out to about 40 a year, because some years we've only had 1 midwife, which is a kind of a full-time load, and then some years way less when we didn't have a midwife, and then in the 90s, hundreds a year. The local birth rate, just to give you some perspective, is about 1,500 to 1,600 babies born in Launceston each year. So when we were getting 200 of those through the birth centre, that was 1/8 of all the babies coming through us, which is pretty amazing when it was funded. Yeah.
Can you talk us through? We're keen to know about the stats of the birth house.
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, stats can sound really boring, can't they? But what hit me when I started looking at them was these are stories. These are powerful stories of women, their partners, their babies. And I had my 4th baby through the birth centre, so I was part of those stories. I wasn't a midwife at the time, but I was pregnant and I met one of the home birth midwives, and she invited me to consider it. And I was really anti-home birth, actually, believe it or not. I'd been a remote area nurse for quite a few years and done maternity emergency training as part of that. And of course, all they tell you are all the things that can go wrong with birth in maternity emergency training. So I had that perspective. And so when this midwife invited me to think about having, she said, why don't you think about a home birth? And I was thinking in my head, no way, there's too much that can go wrong. But my husband heard our conversation and he said to me, Jay, I think that's a great idea. We should really think about that. So a long story short, I had a home birth with one of the birth centre midwives, and it changed my life. I just had, and it wasn't even the most beautiful birth. I've been at really beautiful births as a midwife, and mine wasn't that beautiful. We didn't get the pool filled in time, and so I didn't get to birth in the water, but my kids were there and my husband was there. But my overall sense was, I am amazing. Look what I just did. And that's what led me to want to be a midwife and support other women. And so I did my time in the hospital And the biggest thing I learned from that was not everyone wants a home birth, and it's not right for everyone. And being a midwife is about being with women. It's not imposing on them what I think they should have, but working out what is it that they want. So that was a great lesson for me coming into this. And so the stats really show such a wide range of midwives supporting women with all different circumstances and situations. And they're not all, the most beautiful, sparkly fairy light water births. That's not what the stats show. This is reality, but they're beautiful stories. For example, let's look at the caesarean rate, because we know our national caesarean rate at the moment is around 37-38%. What does that, straight up when you think of a stat, what does that say to you, to a woman who's newly pregnant? It tells her that a third or more of women need to birth via caesarean birth. What does that do to her confidence, her sense of own physiology, her body, when you hear a statistic like that? And I know some women absolutely need to have caesarean births. But the birth centre caesarean rate is 5.1%.
5.1%.
Yeah.
So just let's digest that just by moving women across the road and caring for them in a different space than the hospital.
I wanted to be careful with this data because I know that comparing national stats to small-scale, low-risk models of care isn't really fair. And I thought comparing 34 years of caesarean rate data compared to just this year, or 2021, the Australian Mother and Baby report came out. So what I did is I went back and got all the national caesarean rates over the same period of time and averaged it out. So when I averaged it out over the same period of time, it was 27%. So that's the average for national, and then I averaged birth centres, came out as 5.1. It's still a lot better having 5.1. It's way lower than what the World Health Organization recommendations are of about 10%, I believe. So obviously with this increase in caesarean births, we're going to have a lot more women considering vaginal birth after caesarean, or VBAC. So I can tell you what our VBAC rates are. 78% of women who are having or wanting a VBAC through the birth centre are having a VBAC, and 22% are having repeat caesareans even though they were hoping for a VBAC.
If you look at research for women who are planning a VBAC, the likelihood is around 78 to 85%. But that, if you go to a hospital, the current national statistic is 17%.
Yeah.
Is that what you had?
Yeah, what I could find was, obviously Hazel Keedle's way more all over this, but 12 to 14% of women who've had previous caesarean births nationally are planning a VBAC. But that's because many of them don't even feel they have the option. They're not supported to plan for that, and that's the problem. So that will skew the results. But yes, obviously when a woman comes to me, we're able to present all those options to her and find out what she wants. And so that's where I'd love to tell you a story, because I had a woman that fell into the 22% recently who really, really wanted a VBAC birth. So she had her first birth as a caesarean birth and felt very traumatised by that. So she came to me fairly late in her pregnancy and let me know what had happened, where they were at. Her and her partner were both feeling very traumatised and really wanted a different outcome. They'd already hired a great doula who was working with them, and it was the doula that said to me, "Have you got room for them? Can you squeeze them in, please?" And I really love this doula, so I was like, let me see what I can do. And it worked out well. Obviously, I don't guarantee that someone can have a VBAC. We don't know what's going to happen, but that's what we tried for. And she laboured beautifully. But over time, it became very clear to me that this baby was likely to need some obstetric help out. And so I presented all the options to her. I told her, this is the position your baby's in. It's very tricky for them to be born in this position. These are the things that we can do, position changes, spinning babies, that might help change things up. Baby's still happy at the moment. We have time. or we can go to hospital and transfer and get some obstetric help. Maybe an obstetrician can rotate the baby or help the baby out. So she decided, she had felt she'd done everything she could. She decided it was time to transfer to hospital, and she got there, and a very skilled obstetrician did attempt to rotate her baby, and it just was not budging. And so she ended up with a repeat cesarean birth. And I remember sitting in the postnatal room waiting for her to come back from theatre, just thinking, oh no, she is going to be devastated. More trauma, more disappointment. And while I was waiting for her, I got a photo through on my phone, and it was a picture of her with her new baby, and she was just absolutely radiant, like grinning from ear to ear. And she said to me later, Jamie, that's not how I wanted to birth, but that was my healing cesarean birth. That's how my baby needed to be born, and there was no doubt in her mind that that was what needed to happen. And a lot of her trauma from the first one came from the what if question. Did that really need to happen, birthing through the system? She just wasn't sure. Maybe it did, but she wasn't convinced of that. And she knew this time round that she had done everything possible to support physiology and give her and her baby and her body a chance for a vaginal birth. And in the end, her baby needed a cesarean birth.
And this is the real difference with midwifery care, is that we're not necessarily focused on the end result. We're really focused on the quality and nurturing of the journey.
Right.
And that's what women need as well, is that for their journey to be nurtured so that they're treated beautifully through their care, and that they're given all of the options available to them, and then they get to choose how they proceed.
Yeah.
And in the end, if they're respected in that way and given all of this choice and were the absolute boss in their care, then they do come to this conclusion most of the time that they were given every opportunity to have the birth they wanted. But then if it didn't work out that way, it's not trauma that they feel. They might still be disappointed, but it's not trauma. It's just like, oh, that did not go how I wanted, but I'm not damaged.
That's
emotionally.
right. So that I really wanted to highlight that the 22% of women that don't have the VBAC they planned for, that's not failure. Like, she was really triumphant in this. She had a beautiful time in the birth house, lovely supportive environment, close by if we needed to go over the road, and we did. And she had a really big baby. Like, she had a whopper. And I guess that kind of leads me into another statistic that I discovered, that we have 5.1% of babies at the birth centre are also over 4.5 kilos, so considered a big baby. And the national statistic is a bit less than 2%, I believe. So,
well, got to think that we are currently inducing lots of people before they're due, which does create smaller babies. So this could simply be a result of women going full term, potentially.
Yeah, well, that's what I noticed, because we are having longer gestations. 33% of babies born at the birth centre are born after 41 weeks, because I'm not inducing women. I think our induction rate is about 2.4%, and that's because women have needed that for some reason. I take them to hospital for that induction. So that was fascinating. Yeah, so 24% of babies came after 41 weeks or 41 weeks. 8% came at 42 weeks plus, and then 1% came at 43 weeks.
So that 42 weeks, that is interesting too, because I had a look at mine not long ago, and it was about 10% of my client load ended up either like on 42 or beyond 42 weeks gestation. The stats on 42 weeks in mainstream literature say less than 1% of babies will be born after 42 weeks.
Yeah.
But that's because everybody else is induced. No one's theoretically allowed to even test how long they'll go for. So I think that's quite a more accurate number of.
And that's so powerful, isn't it? Because we've lost the ability to collect that data through the national data collection, because not many women are being allowed, for want of a better word, to go to their normal gestation. I've had 2 women have 2 babies with me in the last few years, and one of them went to 42 weeks and 2 days for both babies, and the other one went to 42 weeks and 3 days for both babies. Babies were born with vernix. They weren't overdue. They were just perfectly when they were meant to come. They came when they were meant to. So, yeah, like, of course, if we're having longer gestations, we are going to have bigger babies, but women are birthing them.
So bigger babies, but less inductions, 2.2%. The current national stat sits somewhere between 40 and 50% of women are either being induced or augmented in their labours.
Yeah, so the induction rate I noticed was 33%, and our women going after 41 weeks was 33%. It matched exactly. That's not including the augmentation, but
whoa.
Yeah, so there you go.
Okay.
Babies are clever. They know when they need to come. And I guess I wanted to just say one of the justifications for induction is that people are afraid that their placenta will give up. I know you've spoken on this in other podcasts, worried about stillbirth. I looked for that in our data as well. We had 1 term stillbirth in that whole 34 years and 2 at 24 weeks. So really, like you were saying, there aren't worse outcomes. Like that's way below the national average, and we're not having worse outcomes for letting women go into spontaneous labour. We're having better outcomes.
Well, and we know that the best prevention for stillbirth is continuity of midwifery care. Like that's documented in research. There's all these fancy things that we're trying to intervene and prevent stillbirths, and wouldn't it be amazing if no woman ever had to experience stillbirth? That's what we're all working towards and hoping for. But the most effective way to reduce the number of babies who are stillborn is to provide continuity of midwifery care. So it's a testament to that even if women are going beyond 42 weeks, still the care of midwife is preventative. So that was amongst 1,300 babies.
Yeah, that's right. And so bigger babies, longer gestations, but way less perineal trauma. Like you would think that would then correlate, okay, we're having bigger babies, women are going to have more perineal damage, but I didn't find that at all. Like I noticed that first degree tears were about the same as the national one. So that's for people that are maybe not midwives or not sure. First degree is just the mildest form of tear. Sometimes you suture them, sometimes you don't. So that was about 20%, and that was very similar to the national rates of first degree tears. But when it came to more severe tears like second and third degrees, very different. So our rate of second degree tears was 9%, and the national rate is about 32%. And third degree tears, our rate was less than 1%, and the national rate is about 3%. And then episiotomies, our rate was 2.5% compared to national, which was 25%. But I noticed back in the 80s, we were doing episiotomies at the birth centre. It must have been part of midwifery practice back then to offer that more commonly than, like I've never needed to do one. So, yeah.
It's possible that those early days contribute a lot of numbers to
That's
those.
That's right. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I imagine there was a time where a lot of women used to get them routinely at one point in history. So I wonder if that correlates with that. But still, compared to 25%, 2.2 is exceptional.
Yeah. On the perineal trauma too, one of my women was having her third baby with us. Actually, I was second midwife for her, and the primary midwife was caring for her. But her first 2 babies were at the hospital, and she had third degree tears with both of them. And then her third baby was with us, and having a beautiful water birth, same partner, same genetics, same size baby actually. They were all very similar in size, and she just came out with a graze. So the environment matters. Maybe the water birth helped. Our water birth rates have gone up significantly. Hardly anyone was having water births in the 80s. In the 90s, a few more, and now I'd say probably 80%-ish of my women are birthing in the water. Yeah, what else can I tell you? So normal vaginal birth rate, 84% of women are having home births. Normal vaginal birth rate is about 95%, obviously if 5% are caesareans. But, nationally, only 41% of women are going into spontaneous labour. That is just so sad.
So if 85% are having home births,
Yeah.
95% are having vaginal births. That would make your transfer rate about 15%.
Yeah, 16%. Exactly right. And of the women that transfer, so 5% of those, like I mentioned, have caesarean births. 4% have needed instrumental births, so ventouse or forceps assistance. But 7% of the ones that have transferred in have still had what's considered a normal vaginal birth without instrumental support. Yeah.
Yeah, because not every transfer, and this is the same for any home birth practice, not every transfer is an emergency transfer. There are the occasional ones where you are going in an ambulance with lights and sirens and we have an actual emergency, but they're quite rare.
Yeah.
Most transfers are actually precautionary where things are mounting and we're identifying potential complications and we're doing a precautionary transfer, because if the worst case scenario occurs, we want to be somewhere with medical care, which is why it doesn't always actually end up in a caesarean or surgical birth or forceps or vacuum.
Yeah, so that's sort of an overview. I'm not sure if there's anything else you're interested in.
Well, I guess my question is, so now we're presented with a collection of statistics that are significantly less intervention than what women are going to experience in a hospital. So immediately people are thinking, well, if they're not intervening, then there's probably way more complications that aren't being managed properly, and therefore lots more babies and women who are suffering poor outcomes. And I assume that most of the women who gave birth in the birth centre would be having physiological placental birth without medicine.
Yeah.
Do you know what the postpartum hemorrhage or postpartum loss rates are?
Yes, so postpartum hemorrhage rate was about 6.5%. And that is if we use the definition of a PPH is over 500 mils. But most of those women did not get transferred for a PPH because we look at the woman, not just the volume of blood she lost. And so if women are feeling well and are well, we don't always have to transfer for that. The average estimated blood loss was 285 mil.
So for people playing at home, there's some research which suggests that there's a definition of postpartum hemorrhage is 500 mils, but actually more realistically in terms of the well-being of women, they usually aren't affected by a 500 mil blood loss. It depends. Some women are affected by 200 mil blood loss. And in a lot of the research is actually turning around to suggest that we should be using 1,000 mils as a benchmark for diagnosing postpartum hemorrhage. So what Jamie's saying, when you look at the woman, maybe she's lost 500 mils, but her heart rate is normal, her blood pressure is normal, she feels well, she doesn't appear to be incapacitated by that amount of blood loss. And so did she truly have a postpartum hemorrhage? But also the postpartum hemorrhage rates in hospital are much higher than 6 to 7%. And uniquely, they use active management, which is the use of an oxytocin injection, and then they pull the placenta out. They use that because they believe, and medicine believes, that by doing that method of placental birth, they can reduce the postpartum hemorrhage rates. And there's a whole episode on postpartum hemorrhage in the podcast, and we have a look at the research. And it does seem to lean towards, if you favour a physiological placental birth in a supportive environment, it's an effective way to manage postpartum hemorrhage, which seems to be what's happened at the birth house, and not forgetting that it's midwives who are supervising these births. So we have medication to stop postpartum hemorrhage.
That's right.
Yeah, when Jamie says, we don't have to transfer, that's because we've identified the postpartum hemorrhage, managed it within the birth house, and we just carry on with care because it's managed. There's no need for any additional care.
So of the women that transferred, like the 16%, 1.8% transferred for either PPH or retained placenta. So it's a very small number.
Yeah, because that's what people do worry about. They're like, "Oh, if I don't go to hospital, then bleeding is a really big risk." But your stats are showing that they're actually less likely to bleed at the birth house than they will.
Yeah, we just don't see it very often. Yeah.
And you aren't using the same techniques as the hospital.
But
still using the same treatments for postpartum hemorrhage, but not the same technique for placental birth. Yes, right, good. It's not very many.
No, yeah. Interestingly, exactly 50% were boys and 50% were girls.
Whoa.
That just landed exactly the numbers. That was
Imagine
interesting.
if all of the boys and girls got together and had more birth center babies.
I know.
It's incredible. So I wanted to invite Jamie onto the podcast today to just highlight that change in maternity care and great outcomes can be achieved with some really grassroots and basic ideas, and that this is not out of our reach. If you've got a little bit of cash to start up a business and buy a house, so tip for young players, if you're thinking that's it, this is what I'm going to do now, this is my life's purpose, be sure before you buy anything that you can actually use it for a place of business. Check with the council how it's zoned. Jamie, did you have any more exciting tidbits about the birth house that maybe we haven't yet covered?
I just think it's an incredible resource, and I just feel so grateful that I've got to set up practice in it. And women are really wanting this. I don't even have a website yet. The birth centre does. So if you would like to see some pictures and see a little bit more, that's on the Launceston Birth Centre website, and my contact details are on there. We really do need more midwives. I'm working with some local midwives who are preparing, but they're not ready yet. So I have 60 women on a wait list at the moment.
Yes, for client. That's right.
Without advertising ever. So
Jamie, what Jamie's saying, she hasn't even put a website together, mostly because she's been so busy caring for women. So this is not a dwindling service. Women want this service. And so if you're a private or endorsed midwife keen to get into private practice, there is a glowing opportunity here. Jamie, I feel like you're going to be inundated with people now. We'll see. But I will make sure that all the details are every podcast episode that we make, I send out an email and a resource page for everything that we spoke about on the podcast. So anybody who's on the mailing list for the podcast can get all of this information. If you want to contact Jamie and see how you can either be a part of the birth house or lighten her load in some way and find all the information, you will find it in that mail out and in the resource folder.
Yeah, so I'm spending my time, I realise I need to replicate myself. So I'm spending this next season focusing on supporting midwives to start, as I was given beautiful support when I started. So, you don't have to do it alone. We need a team. So I'm hoping to grow a lovely little team of midwives here, because this is what women want. And we have a beautiful house and a supportive hospital and maternity care network in Launceston.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Amazing. And so, as I said, Jamie's also a mentor with the Launch Yourself into Private Practice Midwifery mentorship, which opens once a year. We mentor 30 to 50 midwives a year through that mentorship program. And all the details will be in the show notes for all these things. Thank you so much, Jamie. Everybody listening is just buzzing and wondering how they could do this.
It's doable. Thanks, everyone.
To get free access to all the research that's used to create each podcast episode, you can join the mailing list at melaniethemidwife.com, or you can join our members hub and financially support the work of this podcast. In the hub, you can ask me questions, and premium members get access to a monthly Q&A episode where I answer listener questions. You'll also get episode transcripts and additional resources for each podcast episode. All the details are in the show notes.